It's interesting because everyone agrees that the killer has to be between 60 and 75 years old. And because of the HLN series, more than 200 tips have been received by people who think they might know who this is. You could be living next door to him, or you could be somebody who's incarcerated, but you're thinking about, maybe your eccentric Uncle Harry who's in jail. And I think it's the timeline, getting the news out about the timeline of these killings has reignited interest. And even young people who weren't alive when this was going on now know about the facts and are thinking deeply about who this person could be.
So let's talk a little bit about the psychology here of a person who does this.
Sure.
He's leaving at the time clues, like I guess a signature knot. He was known to tie people's hands behind their backs. So in a way, it's almost like you're giving some type of message, like you're wanting to stake your claim, I did this, but obviously not want to get caught. Who does that?
Well, you have to keep in mind that back in 1976 to 81, forensic science existed, but we didn't have DNA, and it was really in its infancy. So there are people who say that the diamond knot, the way he bound some of his victims, was a calling card, was a signature. And other people argue that it was second nature to somebody who might have been in the military, maybe in the Navy, and tied knots as part of his nautical career, or even a cowboy or a rancher who was used to tying bridles and used this kind of knot.
Gotcha.
So the question is, was it a signature, or was it just the only kind of knot this person knew how to actually tie? And that has helped people turn these clues in, because they know somebody who knows how to tie diamond knots who falls in that age group of 60 to 75.
That is fascinating. What else do the killer's repetitive type of behaviors perhaps suggest about, oh gosh, anything from upbringing to motive to just what type of person they could be today, or the types of victims that they preyed upon?
Well, we know that this person couldn't stop. He was a stalker. He was a burglar. He escalated over time. It started with burglary and peeping Tom and stalking. Of course, there were a tremendous number of rapes, more than 45. But then he got bold, and then he didn't care if he killed his victims. And that really shows a power control killer. I know we always go to that, but it is the most common motivation, is the need for power and control. And the binding really does show that. So the key is that this person very often would walk around, eat the food of the victims in their kitchen while he was terrorizing them, and would say, I'm going to kill them, and talk about his mom also, so probably somebody who had mommy issues. The real question is, why did this go on from 76 to 81? Then we had a 5-year gap. Then we have another murder rape in 1986, and then radio silence, literally falling off the radar. That would really indicate that this perpetrator went to prison or changed his life and is living a life of normalcy today.
If the person is in prison now, though, couldn't you just do, wouldn't there be DNA testing, or is there not DNA testing just because you're incarcerated?
Just because you're incarcerated doesn't mean we have your DNA on file, especially if you were incarcerated for a nonviolent crime like burglary. So I think the police are definitely looking in that, but we have a huge incarceration population at this point. And I think that DNA will solve this. He could, in fact, be deceased. But there are two theories, because he called one of his victims in 1991, and there was a woman and children sounds in the background. To me, that sounds like the visiting room of a prison, or somebody who got married and is trying to live a life of normalcy. Either way, in the name of justice for the victims, we need to keep looking for this killer, find him, and bring him to justice.
So this Sunday's episode deals with inside a killer's mind, a little bit what we've been talking about with our criminologist here this morning. And I wanted to thank you so much for being up early and walking us through this. So do you know the Golden State Killer? The next episode, Sunday night on HLN. Intriguing.
Live from downtown Bakersfield, 23 ABC News at 5 starts now.
Good evening. Police say he terrorized the state of California for a decade, killing 12 people and sexually assaulting more than 50 others from 1976 through 1986. And tonight, a man suspected of being the Golden State serial killer is behind bars. 72-year-old former police officer Joseph James Deangelo, who served in Tulare County, was arrested after authorities say they matched discarded solid DNA evidence from his Sacramento home to genetic evidence from the crimes. 23 ABC's Tori Cooper has been following the investigation and has the new details on the case. Tori?
Jessica, Deangelo is the suspected killer in a dozen homicides and nearly 50 rapes that took place across the state of California from 1976 to 1986. And tonight, the Sacramento District Attorney's Office is confident that the crime lab results are connecting the right individual to the crime.
After a more than 40-year search,
we found the needle in the haystack.
Sacramento officials announced today that they arrested 72-year-old Joseph James Deangelo, the person they believe to be the so-called Golden State Killer, but others at home may know him as something else.
He's been called the East Side Rapist. He's been called the Visalia Ransacker, the original Night Stalker.
Authorities say the iconic killer is responsible for 12 murders and almost 50 rapes across California, some cases happening in areas as close as Stockton and Visalia. Authorities say he has a background in law enforcement.
He worked for the Exeter Police Department from 1973 to 1976.
Crime lab employees and DNA analysts making a connection to Deangelo upon their lab findings over the last 6 days. Sacramento authorities then moving forward with surveillance over Deangelo.
We were able to get some discarded DNA, and we were able to confirm what we thought we already knew, that we had our man.
Early this morning, jail records show that detectives arrested Deangelo at his home in the Citrus Heights suburb of Sacramento, where he was charged with the deaths of 4 people back in the 70s and 80s. But officials believe he is connected to other cases spanning across at least 10 different counties in California. Officials say Kern County is not one of them.
This case deeply affected this entire state.
Detectives say the so-called Golden State Killer is also responsible for 120 home burglaries, where many times he would tie up couples in the middle of the night. But officials say this is just the beginning of a journey toward justice.
We will, God willing, hold this man fully accountable for his crimes.
That bombshell arrest, that former police officer who authorities say went on a reign of terror for so many years. The numbers, as I mentioned, are simply staggering. At least 12 murders, 45 rapes. They have been searching for more than 4 decades, and tonight the major clue that unlocked this just days ago. They say this is their man, Joseph Deangelo, now 72, arrested outside his home. They surprised him. He spent years as a California police officer. He'd been married. ABC's Whit Johnson leads us off from California on the man dubbed the Golden State Killer.
Tonight, hiding in plain sight, police say one of the most elusive serial killers in American history has been captured outside his suburban home.
We found the needle in the haystack, and it was right here in Sacramento.
Law enforcement now identifying 72-year-old Joseph James Deangelo as the Golden State Killer. The once married former police officer now under arrest for a violent crime spree that terrorized California for more than 40 years.
He was committing the crimes during the time he was employed as a peace officer, and obviously we'll be looking into whether it was actually on the job.
Detectives working the case for decades, but Deangelo not a suspect until days ago when they got a break. They say cutting-edge DNA testing allowed them to make a match.
We were able to get some discarded DNA, and we were able to confirm what we thought we already knew, that we had our man.
At least 12 murders, 45 rapes, and more than 100 burglaries spread fear across the state in the 1970s and 80s. His voice allegedly heard in this chilling phone call, taunting one of his victims. Those crimes meticulously planned. The suspect, wearing a ski mask, would break into homes, gag, blindfold, and tie up his female prey before carrying out his brutal attacks. Today, police could be seen searching Deangelo's home in this quiet Sacramento neighborhood. His neighbors stunned.
He was just an odd guy, kind of kept to himself, but had a temper.
For the victims' families, overwhelming relief.
It is time for all victims to grieve and to take measure one last time.
18-year-old Janelle Cruz, the last known victim, was murdered in 1986. Soon after, her sister Michelle fled California, fearing for her own safety.
The feeling is undescribable. I am so happy. I feel so blessed. We finally got the guy who brutally raped and murdered my sister.
So let's get to Whit Johnson with us live from California tonight. And Whit, it's hard to wrap your head around these numbers. He's accused in at least a dozen murders, 45 rapes, as we mentioned there, but he's only been charged for a few of them. Where does the case go from here?
And David, this is just the beginning. That key DNA evidence came to light only 6 days ago. Prosecutors say that DNA and the methods he used links dozens of these cases up and down the state. They're promising more charges in the coming days. David?
Whit Johnson leading us off tonight. Whit, thank you.
Killer to justice.
Now, authorities say the masked D'Angelo, armed with a gun or knife, would break into his victims' homes at night. He sometimes tied up the man and piled dishes on his back and then raped the woman while threatening to kill them both if the dishes tumbled. D'Angelo was fired in 1979 from the Auburn Police Department northeast of Sacramento. Despite thousands of tips over the years, his name never came up on authorities' radar before last week. Colleen, on.